Uh, a lot has happened in the last week. I'm talking about houselessness issues overall in Kalamazoo. But if you've been paying attention to things going on in the community since we last broadcast, uh, it's been very eventful, mostly good. Although it has also, again, we're continuing to expose a lot of these baked in inequities that are going on. But there's a lot, there's a lot to talk about, warranting some nuanced discussion. So let's kind of just go at it one subject at a time, kind of walk you through the chain of events that have happened over the last week. So I guess I will start. There was an action um, last week. This was January 29th. And a loose coalition of local organizers under the banner of "No one needs to sleep outside" uh, basically took a building, held it for, I believe, about 7 hours or so. It was an empty, vacant building near the Mill Street houseless encampment, which is one of the bigger ones in the city. If you've been kind of paying attention to this issue for a while, it's also a place where there's a recent explosion. There's been a little bit of confusion about what happened there that day, and honestly, I think a little bit of misinformation about the people who organized it, who actually participated, wanted to clear some of those things up. Just based on like my local knowledge and such. I'm not interviewing anybody about it today, but I have talked to some folks about how things went down that day. There was an MLive article about it that kind of painted this inaccurate picture, and other groups have ran with it. I'll talk a little bit about this in a second, but uh, they originally the organizers believed they were taking a land bank property. Turns out it was actually recently purchased by the folks over at Rooted. I'll talk about that in a second, but the real crux of what I want to talk about right now is the MLive article basically painted this picture of, and gosh, you see this come up a lot whenever the issues around homelessness are brought up in Kalamazoo, or houselessness, which is this idea of the outside agitator, or that there's something above and beyond, or something unusual or suspect when these particular elevated demonstrations happen. You saw it a lot in the Bronson Park houseless encampment. There was this very big narrative being pushed that it was being led by people on the outside, and we even saw back in the Bronson Park houseless encampment, the whole outside agitator aspect. It was not that they were organizing, although there were folks being dropped off there to ostensibly stir the pot. Which, if you know your organizing history, that's like some basic ABC, like I wouldn't even say COINTELPRO stuff, but that's like, if you're trying to mess up a demonstration or a protest, that's what you would do. So anyway, uh, I wanted to hone on this point that they're making, that the organizers were not actually parts of the houseless encampment. There's basically kind of these outside, what do you call, anarchists or whatever. Some of them, I'm sure, but anyway, uh, no camp is a monolith, and a lot of the people who were interviewed for that MLive article, they basically seemed to include a lot of people who just were not in line with what was going on, who did not support it. Now, there were some houseless people down there who were vocal about not wanting to be part of this, but there were also many down there who were. And I do know, at least, from my knowledge of some of the folks who put on, like, they would not just impose their will on the houseless encampment. There were conversations going on about this. There were people who were interested in actually occupying the building for very, like, practical reasons. They're houseless, they want to be inside. Um, so I think it's important to note that, like, uh, and not that I'm completely letting the organizers off the hook. I'm not going to do. Hopefully, it doesn't sound like too much of like backseat organizing. But there are a couple of points I wanted to bring up. But just this general idea that these organizers had nothing to do with the houseless camp, or they weren't listening to them, or they were doing something that the camp didn't want to do. That is both incorrect, and it also it lends itself to this very unnuanced take that we've honestly seen before. That there's like this black and white schism between like these outside people who aren't doing what the affected community wants. Um, that's doesn't really pull up to scrutiny. Again, a lot of people who are actually there that day, a lot of people who were part of the camp, um, did want to take part in this action, and many did not. That's real life. That's it's complicated. It doesn't appeal to these convenient narratives. That being said, as it was found out later, the building itself was not actually owned by the land bank. It was actually owned by Rooted, who very recently purchased it up. So to the credit of the No One Needs to Sleep Outside organizers, those county records, perhaps sometimes they're not updated consistently. So part of their whole messaging around it was this idea that the land banks owns all of these empty properties. And it goes back to this thing that I pointed out on the show before. Kalamazoo has X number of empty properties for every houseless person. So that is very true. I do want to say Rooted kind of boosted these ideas from the MLive article that these organizers were disconnected from the houseless population, which I think was kind of unfair. However, I will speak to something that the Rooted folks brought up, which is, again, your level of critique on the organizers for, whether it's a land bank building or not, whatever. It really it's almost an issue of messaging, and even the folks who brought up the property spoke towards in general agreement that yes, this is a huge problem, and the city needs to step up and do more about it. Something that did get brought up by both them and some other organizers and community members that I know is general safety of some of these buildings, and that is not worth dismissing. There's a lot that needs to be thought out about the general safety of buildings like this, and how much work needs to be put in if you're going to occupy a property. And keep in mind, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, because again, we speak out against capitalism all the time on this show, and when it comes to sort of like quirkiness of private property and the fact that there's like empty domiciles and houseless people, yes, it's ridiculous. But it is worth saying, yes, it is critical that, when you're putting together an action like this, especially if your intention is to hold a space for an extended period of time, is the work going to be put in to make sure that area is going to be safe? I think, knowing some of the folks loosely, more credit should be given to them. I know a lot of these folks are more responsible than the media was giving them credit for, and are aware of these issues. It is worth saying though that we shouldn't get bogged down in the minutia of this action and those sort of particulars. I think it does bring up some interesting conversations about when a property is owned by the city land bank versus how you approach it when it's bought by like a local nonprofit run primarily by Black folks and Black women. But I think what we need to really focus on here is that actions like this are meant to it's like a shot across the bow. It's trying to drive public attention and scrutiny to a huge problem. And as far from what I see, having observed and been part on and off of actions around houselessness over the last few years. Be it Bronson Park or the Code Blue sheltering that happened during the polar vortex. This is, I think it's a necessary escalation because, a lot of us have been talking about this rhetorically for a while. These empty spots, there's houseless people. How ridiculous is that? And even though the building itself wasn't held, and, we had some of these other like tertiary critiques, bottom line was, this ended up getting a lot of attention from the city and regionally. And something that interesting that happened that very day. And granted, like this was outside of what actually happened with the building, is that the police came down to ostensibly give one of the biggest homeless camps in Kalamazoo eviction notices, and that happened the same day as the action. But it wasn't. It was interesting because the action was not because of that. That was just a separate serendipitous bit of injustice. And what's interesting to me is I think that like serendipity is the word, because at the same time that the Kalamazoo Public Safety decides to try to evict people from the city's largest camp, we have people organizing to say not only put their foot down against such callous thinking, but say we need solutions. These people need solutions. And what was the result of that? Now let's talk about how this kind of spanned out during the week. There was another, um, uh, basically kind of the next step was organizing around a smaller houseless camp over off Stadium. That was this one was privately owned. It wasn't owned by the land bank. It was owned by PlazaCorp, which, if you don't know too much about PlazaCorp, they own a lot of properties around the Kalamazoo area. And leading into Tuesday, no one needs to sleep outside, and allies were organizing a phones app of PlazaCorp, basically saying it was very unjust that PlazaCorp is using Kalamazoo Police Department to evict people at the stadium property. Again, this is separate from the Mill Street camp that I was just talking about. But what was the trajectory of that? How did that pan out? Well, what ended up happening is there was going to be a demonstration Tuesday at 5 o'clock in front of PlazaCorp, but before that could even take place, PlazaCorp itself basically offered the resources, or at least coordinated resources. We shouldn't give credit because I'm about to explain who did what. That the folks that were at the stadium encampment ended up getting rooms at the Knights Inn Motel. I will briefly read from this article on M Live by Ryan Boldfried. On Tuesday, February 2nd, residents of a small homeless encampment located north of Stadium Drive were relocated to the hotel at the request of PlazaCorp, who manages the property. On Wednesday, more than a half. Okay, so anyway, by the way, interesting. We do a lot of media criticism. This article focuses a lot on garbage and stuff that's left behind. That's very callous. It kind of feeds into this idea of like houseless people are like unclean and lazy and all that stuff. We don't need that. We need to make sure people have a place to stay when things are cold. Lisa Wilcutt said multiple people were moved in Tuesday night by integrated services. So the integrated services were the ones who actually should deserve the credit for making sure these people were housed. And she helped another person move in Wednesday morning. Wilcutt is vice president of Lockhart Management and Consulting, which partners with the Lift Foundation, serves as property manager for the hotel. And going on, it says, Ryan Bridges, public information officer for the city of Kalamazoo, said Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety was first notified of Stadium Drive encampment in November. Bridges said the department was contacted by PlazaCorp Tuesday, February 2nd, and asked to assist in removing trespassing individuals residing at the encampment. So here's how this ends up playing out. PlazaCorp calls the police to kick houseless people off of a strip of land that they ostensibly own, but aren't using. Uh, this public pressure campaign coalesces, start making phone calls to PlazaCorp. And before the protest is even supposed to happen, PlazaCorp goes back, involves integrated services, and finds housing for these camps. Now, granted, there's a lot of other factors that are involved in here, and I don't want to downplay that. But I think it is worth noting. Uh, I don't think it would be too beyond the pale for me to point to this weekend of extremely visible protest and public pressure. Um, and then we saw a kind of corporate uh, uh, land owning property management company decide, hey, let's make sure these folks that we're evicting have a place to go versus, prior to that public pressure, not really having a plan for those people or not really caring. And I really want to say this is the power of organizing. It is the power of public pressure. It is the power of, organizing these protests. And, like, I think, there's been, I've seen some folks in the community poo poo, the occupation of that building. But we shouldn't downplay sometimes. And, even I have mentioned, we shouldn't rely too much on like, symbolic stuff. And a lot of us are getting kind of tired of that. But I think it was critical and important that we had a group who was willing to say, like, look, we're dropping these banners down from this building. People are desperate. They need a place to stay. This is the logical next step. And, whatever was going on in the city prior to that, it really does seem like that sort of public pressure and attention has expedited those processes. And in the case of PlazaCorp, forced a moral corporate entity to do the right thing. Again, power concedes nothing without demand. And as it turns out, if you demand that they extend basic human rights and courtesy to houseless people, you can pressure them into doing that. And then kind of the whole denouement of this is as many of you know, and you can look outside right now, snow is coming down. This week we've got coming up is going to be the coldest we've had all winter. Temperatures in the teens and single digits. And there's a very marked difference in the approach that the city is taking to it versus, say, a couple years ago during the polar vortex, or even just the rest of this winter or last winter. So this is from an article that was published today. With extreme weather on the way, city opens warming center near Kalamazoo houseless encampment. Keep in mind, this is less than a week after the city was like, we're going to evict these people. Now they're doing this instead. So here's what they're doing. 2 days after a small houseless encampment north of Stadium Drive was cleared, city leaders are bringing warmth to a much larger encampment near downtown Kalamazoo. As the forecast calls for single-digit temperatures and wind chills below zero this weekend, the city announced in a news release it will be opening a temporary warming shelter for its unhoused population at 7 a.m. on Friday, February 5th. The warming center will be located on a city-owned parcel near the homeless encampment near Mills Street and Riverview Drive, and will have capacity to accommodate 60 people. Through collaboration with our community partners, including the United Way and Kalamazoo County Continuum of Care, we are able to act quickly and stand up this temporary warming shelter to help keep those vulnerable members of our community safe and warm during those sub-zero temperatures. Before I do any commentary on that, this is really important information. Get it out to any folks that are vulnerable. There are going to be other warming centers during this cold weather event. Kalamazoo Gospel Ministries, Gospel Mission. I know we've talked about them on the show. But they at least are saying they're going to open their facility during the day to provide warming areas. The River Church over at 517 Wallbridge is going to continue its daytime warming and service center off East Ransom Street and will expand their services to be open on the weekend. Ministry with Community. 500 North Edward Street is providing services as a daytime warming center, including providing to-go breakfast and lunch for those unable to enter the building due to reduced capacity compliance with social distancing. And Integrated Services of Kalamazoo is now operating 25 rooms at the former Knight's Inn and is currently serving more than 40 individuals at that location. The organization continues to work daily to prepare additional rooms for capacity. Um, so, one, there's at least some tangible preparedness. It's looking like, at the very least, let's talk a little bit about like the code blue emergency shelters that sprung up a couple of years ago during the polar vortex. I believe 2019 it was. Yes. And in that case, the city really didn't do all of that much. Local churches, local grassroots organizers, just everyday people had to step up for about a week, work in shifts, and basically just create a extreme winter weather shelter system completely from scratch at various local churches. And this year, it does hearten me a little bit to see that the city is providing some resources. A tangible warming center to folks at the camp is way different than what happened 2 years ago. The city was hands off, completely hands off, and average everyday people had to step in to fill that gap. And again, if you look at kind of the chain of events from last weekend, that occupation to where we're at right now, yes, I really would say it is the result of, and not just this week, but years of this grassroots organizing around houselessness that is creating this better outcome that we have this week. Now, is it good enough? No, absolutely not. But it is much better than where we've been previously. And I think it's important for us to take stock of this because, leftists and community organizers, we're really bad at taking stock of our W's, our wins, our victories. And the way that this situation is being approached versus how it's been approached in the past is better. And that is the result of all of us out here in the community who are, in whatever way that we're doing that, whether we're out there feeding the homeless, whether we're creating these events to occupy buildings, if we're, bringing awareness. This is a very different city than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago when it comes to dealing with a houseless situation and the amount of pressure that's been put on the city, as well as the attention of these great, grassroots organizers to try to provide these resources is critical and important. But as we said last week, we've got to make sure the city doesn't continuously kick the can to nonprofits and regular everyday people. It needs to assume a degree of responsibility and an actual long-term plan on how to assist houseless folks, especially during cold snaps like we are about to experience in this coming week. For that revolution solution.